Interesting chat today, lads. We had Darragh Mulcahy from Raise the Bar Systems on. What were one or two of your highlights, Damien?
Just some of his approaches to coaching, to dealing with different kinds of teams and individual athletes all at the same time. There was some fantastic insights just into his own experiences.
Shane, you seem surprised that they even have gyms down in Tramore. What did you find out about it?
I honest to God didn't even know there was anywhere outside of the Pale. But it was interesting, first from a geography point of view. And he just had amazing insights into different training systems that I'd never heard of, but stuff that really just piqued my interest. It's also always humbling to find out how unstrong you really are.
His general template around training was something that I really enjoyed, and I'm actually definitely just going to take from him and apply to a lot of my own programs. His density sets as well, I think, are the real highlights, so definitely stay listening right through. So right up next we have Darragh Mulcahy of Raise the Bar Systems in Tramore, County Waterford. Just slight disclaimer on last week, everyone. Emma mentioned at one stage that she was impressed with my strength, saying, I saw you squat 170. Really, and to be fair to the other people, particularly today, I should have hopped in and said, I have by a mile the smallest squat on this podcast, particularly today with the guests we have. In terms of general people, probably a little bit stronger. As hardcore gym goers go, Shane and Damien, yeah, they're proper strong. But today's guest, Darragh, he has represented his country in strength sports level of strong. Darragh, how do you end up at that stage that you're there in full Irish gear, squatting with weight on your back?
Yeah, it's a bit of a journey, all right. And even you were kind of comparing, everyday people and then gym goers and then people who represent our country. And the funny thing is, when I went to a World Championships 2 years ago, I was right near the bottom of the bracket. So it's just all the different levels as you go up along. So you think my best squat is 245 in a competition, and you go there and some people, they're warming up with that. I think the world record at 83 kilos is somewhere around, I think it's over 300 at this stage. So their last warm up is probably 250 or 260. So yeah, don't get me wrong, I'm proud of getting to a 240 squat, but in the context of people out there on a world stage, it's a frightening to see them, the rate at which they progress. But it's been a journey over the last couple of years. Bit of a background check on myself. Do you want me to go that way, John?
Yeah, that's ideal.
Yeah, so I guess I would have grown up playing the majority of sports like most rural Irish lads do, and particularly then I kind of moved towards rugby. I went to a rugby school. I moved in 5th year, and so yeah, we trained most days of the week on the pitch, but we also gymmed an awful lot after training that night time. So that was my first exposure of gym training, and it was for the sole purpose of just getting better to play sports.
What school was that? Were you boarding then that you gymmed in Devon, or was it just really close by?
No, I was a boarder. I was in Rockville College in Tipperary there. So yeah, that was my first exposure of gym training, and I went there as a winger / full back, and I played 2 years of senior cup as a hooker. So I went there about 75 kilos weight, and
a lot of gymming.
Yeah, but don't get me wrong, I was still really small. I was just blessed that there was a very big pack around me. But I had to throw myself into the gym inside of it to put on some bit of size, so I didn't embarrass the rest of them anyway. So yeah, and look, I suppose as things progressed over the years, I would be a kind of a classic example of someone who went from the gym being an assistance to their sport to eventually the gym being my sport. And it's a slow kind of transition. It could be from playing too much rugby, whatever it may be. My circumstances changed with careers and stuff. But eventually it came to a point where I pulled back from playing hurling and playing rugby, and I just focused on powerlifting for 3 years. So it did kind of line up quite well with my job in that, I was working a lot in gyms, and that meant that my schedule was all over the place. So I might get one night of actual playing, training properly, which means I wasn't getting picked at the weekend, which was really annoying me. So I was kind of doing something. I was probably playing 2 sports kind of half-arsed, did you get me? And I wanted to do something. I said to myself, I'm too young to be doing stuff half-arsed. I prefer to just go in on one thing hard for a while anyway. So I chose powerlifting, and I gave it a really good rattle. And after 3 years, I got picked to go to a World Championships, which was actually the target I kind of set myself when I initially started. I love goal setting. I'm a goal setting freak. But the two targets I kind of set myself were to win an 83 kilos national championship. That never happened, unfortunately. But the other one was to represent Ireland. I guess, another thing is I love loads of different sports. So I played a little bit of Gaelic football with my county when I was very young, a bit of primary game. And I played a little bit of rugby with Munster when I was underage as well. So the last thing I wanted to do was I really wanted to get some form of an Irish representation. That was like the perfect trifecta in my head, because I just, it was the last thing I was kind of missing. So yeah, that's my claim to fame anyway, that I gave it a shot for 3 years, and June 2019, I'd say, I went to World Championships in Sweden. So yeah, that was the...
And what was kind of the progression like? So say when you started just gymming first in Rockwell and stuff like that, did you notice yourself, God, I'm actually way stronger really quickly than most of the lads? Or was there a huge amount of work went into getting from just starting gymming to lifting on the international scene? Like the kind of progression of your numbers and stuff.
Yeah. I noticed I actually had quite a strong bench in comparison to most other lads. And it's just because of my makeup. I'm quite short at arms. I just seem to be a little bit more tricep heavy than other lads. It just seemed to my makeup. But I was really a really poor squatter and deadlifter. So to give you a bit of context, I think when I kind of committed to powerlifting, my numbers were round about a 150 squat, sorry, a 120 bench, 130 bench even, a 150 squat, and around about a 180 to 200 kilo deadlift. Okay, so in the space of 3 years, my bench went from 120 to about 160, so 40 kilos. So over, say, three-ish years, it's about 10 kilos a year, you could say, even a little bit less. The squat then went from about 150 to 250, we'll say. So it's 10, that's whatever, 100 kilos, about 20 kilos a year, and a deadlift went from about 180 to 275. So something like not too far off 100 kilos again. But like when you piece it up, like, block by block, it's actually quite manageable. But like in the context of the ratio when I started, like my bench was probably a bit more than the normal, whereas my squat and deadlift for a guy in the middle of his 20s playing rugby, who had an exposure of about 3 or 4 years of strength training, like they weren't out of this world numbers. I had a lot of work to do with them. And the frustrating thing with something like powerlifting is, right, when you start, the national record might be, we'll just say it's 200 kilos, right? So you think to yourself, all right, I get to 200 kilos, I might have a national record. But when you get to 200 kilos, it's now at 250. So the way that the first coach I had, Arthur Lynch, the way he described it was the goalpost is always moving in powerlifting, which is extremely frustrating for a fella that likes goal setting, because as soon as you get close to it, it just pushes on again. It's like you're never getting there. But no, it was lovely. Look, the process of the whole thing was fantastic, and it was brilliant. But yeah, it was that was the kind of the context as to how strong I was.
And to build towards that 3 year kind of mark, like what kind of stepping stones did you kind of aim for along the way to obviously you weren't kind of sitting there on day one going like, in 3 years I'm going to be at this point. You set yourself, I'd imagine, different competitions. How did you kind of gauge those out or plan for those? I suppose obviously the goal is to get more weight on the bar across the thing, but you had your starting point, and did you pick certain competitions along the way, or that you had your eyes set on, or how did you work it out?
Yeah, so I started off with a couple of local meets, and it's not that I was by no means did I stand out as being abnormally strong or anything. It's just I really, really enjoyed it. I loved the feeling of doing a block of work for 3 or 6 months, going in and getting the fruits of your labour. So this kind of process started of working hard, getting into a local competition, and then actually kind of by fluke I got invited to a national championships because someone pulled out. Probably a year of competing, I got invited to a national championships, finished rock bottom, but I was just delighted to be there. And then the following year then, I got an automatic invite because I had done quite well throughout the competitions in the year, and I finished second. So because 83 kilos would be quite a common weight class, because most lads would be in around it, you send 2 from that weight class to a World Championships. The guy that won it, and he'll win it for however long he wants to be in that, Damien Nam, he's extremely strong. And like, even before we all went out, we were like, oh, Damien's going to win it hands down. But it was about 5 or 6 of us, like me and maybe 3 or 4 others, that were about the same goal. So it was competitive in our sense as to who could finish second. But that's the thing, is like, there's no, like, bar Damien has bar he gets food poisoning the morning of it, he's not going to mess up here. Like, it's a little bit different to other sports in that, you know, if Ireland plays Scotland on Sunday, like, and yeah, whoever's favourites, but the other team might have they can still quite tip it, and it's not the most out of this world thing. But in powerlifting, there's never really those big upsets. It might come down to 2 guys being really head to head, but you're never going to see a rank outsider push in. So yeah, I got to a national championships, finished second, and sorry, the about 6 months previous to that, I got invited to a Western European Championships. Essentially, what that is like, so Ireland sends its top team to the Worlds, its top teams to the Euros, and then they have kind of like a development type team. It was actually the first year of it, but it was on Norway, and I got sent to that. That was a great experience. It was like a stepping stone. It wasn't really like a national team, so to speak, but that's a really kind of it was a great achievement, and it was a great experience. And then from there, then I kind of really set my mind on trying to get a proper team, I suppose.
And to kind of build a bit on Damien's point and to what you said there, it's really important to set goals that are very specific to you. That if you're saying your goal is to win a national championships, but you have a Damien Nam who's just ridiculously strong, you need to set those kind of small milestones for yourself, and even little improvement goals, because otherwise you're always doomed to failure. Whereas if you say, okay, in the next 12 months I want to put 15 kg on squat, 15 kg on deadlift, and 7.5 on bench, and just achieving that, it's still going to give you some kind of degree of success without necessarily winning overall, as opposed to just saying, I want to win, and that's it.
Yeah, that's 100% right. You have to make it so that whatever kind of targets you set revolve more so around yourself, and not focusing too much on the opposition. You can't really control what they do, and people progress at a different rate. You know, and sometimes, like, I went through a period of watching other people's Instagrams, and you're getting browned off because they're progressing so much faster. Like, that's just the way things go. People progress at different rates, you know. Like, people have different scenarios going on. So you really just have to focus on, what can I do? And sometimes it's a case of going like, all right, I need a block right here now, where I need to really focus on my deadlift. It's really weak in comparison to my squat, or whatever it may be. So something like that, where you focus on your own numbers, and then just breaking it down like you do with any sort of target, and how am I going to best go about doing this, and do I need to make adjustments, and do I need to work, you know? So it's all that kind of thing. But yeah, bringing it back to yourself, that's the only way. I think the intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation type thing, that's what it kind of comes back to.
Do you find the influence of, say, Instagram, if we take like social media, as a kind of a bit of a hindrance, say, especially when it comes to competition? If you can see what your competition are putting out there, what you're coming up against, if you've any little bit of, maybe you're not quite hitting your targets and the competition is right around the corner, do you feel like you're better off maybe, I suppose, not following lads that you compete against to see where they're at, or does that even play on your mind? I suppose just coming down to the training is one thing, but the psychology of an event, you know, that this is where I'm being measured, this is where that lift is really important, and I've seen him lift more than this, you know, does that play in your mind, or are you very good at separating out that social media influence from your performance?
It definitely plays a role, like, and you know, with all best intentions, you try and stay away from it, and you try not to look at it in that, but it definitely does. One way I've really noticed social media to be kind of negative in relation to like training and so on, it's come to me personally lately, is when you're going through like an injury, and you notice everyone else is kicking on, but you seem to have the brakes on. That's when I think, because you feel almost like helpless. Like I've been going through something for the last while, and it hasn't cleared up. And on reflection, you kind of look at, and don't get me wrong, friends of mine who compete, and their numbers are exploding, and then you're at the back of your head, you're still stuck where you were 12 months ago. You're like, but what if what if I hadn't got this niggle or this injury? That's where I do think. So when you're in a kind of a position where your headspace mightn't be the best anyway, then you go onto social media and you see everyone else striving. I think that's when it really can drive you mad. When I think social media when things are good, social media is great. But when things aren't so good, I think social media can be dangerous in regards to the whole lifting side of things anyway.
Can that impact as well sometimes your training discipline, and that, like, if you're going through a block of sets of 6 and 8 and just building up volume, and you see someone else max out, you're like, I really want to show him because I'm fairly certain I can lift more than him, and I'm just going to throw it up on Instagram now to show him, and then you're fatigued for next week and you're not able to do your sets of 6 and 8 to the same quality that you would otherwise have been.
Oh yeah, that's, and I see that a lot with different lads I coach as well, and they'd say, they'd kind of go off program, so to speak. I don't think there's any badness. I don't think it actually there's a conscious decision to go, all right, I'm gonna max out here. It's just like it nearly comes on them. I don't think there's any like conscious decision to because it impacts the social media. I don't think it happens that way, but it's just like building up, and then all of a sudden the floodgates open, and it's like, all right, I want to see where I'm at, because this fella seems to be training where he's at. Or similarly, what you might see, what I've heard kind of been said before is, but so and so seems to max out a lot. Why can't I do that? That kind of give me. So if he's able to do it, he looks very strong. And I suppose when it comes to kind of sidetracking up, when it comes to coaching, it's trying to explain the bigger picture then, and explain the rationale behind why we're doing what we're doing and stuff. Yeah.
Because I even see similar now with, because you're kind of monitoring teams or people you're working with through Strava. And I generally set it up that, like, I want you to do the intervals really hard, but the longer stuff really easy. And you see their pace and they're like 4:30 per kilometre. I'm like, did you find that easy? No, it's hard enough now. Push myself. And I'm like, why? Like, the slower you do this, the better. But like, some of my friends might see and they'll think I'm unfit because I'm not pushing myself on a 7k run. I'm like, oh, come on, like, what are we working towards? Is we want to be fit when we get on the field and win games, not do a 7k run in such and such a time.
You know what? It's funny you said that. I was just giving out a new block of programming there for Camogie team, and I was just updating one or two things, and I was chatting to a couple of girls saying how we getting on with the first 2 weeks of it. I said, yeah, I'm finding the tempo run's the hardest part. I'm like, the tempos should be like, tempos are in there as like an optional day. They're not even a compulsory day. Like, they should be done. Are you taking the full break? No. I'm just kind of going again whenever I'm getting some. No, use those. But I think that's just that's a GA thing. Like, they want to be going. They have to be pressing hard. They want to be training 12 months of the year. They don't want to take a week off for fear they'd miss out. Like, Irish GA, I don't know. It's one or the other anyway.
Mm-hmm. And that can often come from coaching too, where, like, you might be out there doing a certain wad of training, and you've got a coach talking in your ear going like, here, they're not pushing hard enough, and you're left trying to educate a coach who wants to see people being flogged all the time, and they're talking to players who are just soaking up that, maybe we're supposed to be flogged all the time. So it's it can be a tricky position to be in from our perspective, for sure.
Yeah, and like, don't get me wrong. There's definitely times when teams should go hard, and everyone training should be a portion of hard training. But as John said, when you're off, you're off, and when it's light, it's light. I think it was Grode Hegarty had it up there recently, like that when they're on, they're really on, and when Limerick are off, they're really off. They just switch off. There's no WhatsApp, that kind of thing. There's a lot to be said for that approach, because, as you know, like, sometimes when you're kind of tipping away at this kind of moderate intensity, because you can't keep that high intensity for the whole duration of whatever is the interval or the session or whatever it is. It just after a while it becomes a big moderate session, which is neither here nor there, because nothing really happens at moderate. It's either really high intensity or we're just moving along the field, we're tracking. That's kind of that low aerobic stuff. So that moderate stuff, anyway, sorry, that would be my approach, that I would kind of go a little bit higher or a little bit lower. it was kind of Charlie Francis' kind of idea as well, wasn't it? That high low type day. So I think that works well, but trying to merge that into a GA format can be hard at times.
One of the big reasons we want to get you on, Darragh, is specifically because of your expertise and strength. Like we had a full episode before dedicated to developing strength, but like if you look at me anyway, you'd be like, what does he know? Whereas like, as we said, you've represented your country. You know how to get people strong. And like to draw a bit on powerlifting and principles of powerlifting and apply them back to largely like field-based athletes or just general people who want to get that bit stronger. So powerlifting is based on the 3 big lifts: squat, bench and deadlift. Is it necessary to do all 3 of those to get properly strong? And are they the best way? Are they a good way? Or can we possibly look at some alternatives before we start digging into like sets, reps, times per week, all like that? We'll just kind of chat about the actual lifts themselves first.
Yeah, like I'm a big believer in the basics. So like a squat, hinge, a push, and a pull. So whatever variation they come in, they have to kind of come in for most populations, I think anyway, okay? So yeah, like for if you're a competitive powerlifter, you have to do your competitive squat and your competitive deadlift and your competition bench press. If you're somebody playing sport, you can do them, but are they the best variations? It comes down to like a risk to reward type debate. For me personally, when it comes to GA and field based sports, I probably veer away from like your classic high bar squat or a bench press and a classic deadlift. And there's 2 kind of reasons for it. So when I think of strength, like I either want to get near maximal weight on the bar, okay, so whether that's like, or at least we're training that strength stimulus, or else we're getting plenty of range of motion and we're focusing more on hypertrophy. So it's either one or the 2. So when it comes to like, we'll just say a traditional deadlift, for example, that to me, unless you're a powerlifter, it doesn't really get the maximal weight on the bar, nor does it get the maximum range of motion. So what I would use instead would be something like a trap bar deadlift. Number 1, we get more weight on the bar and it's far safer and it's far easier to set up. Okay? And number 2 then with the RDL is we get more range of motion and we move more towards that hypertrophy focus. Okay? That's kind of the way I've always went about it. That the conventional deadlift, something like that, it takes a lot of cueing, takes a lot of coaching. When you've got 25 lads in a room, it's just not feasible, in my opinion anyway. Whereas a trap bar deadlift, it's fairly straightforward to set up for, especially when you've got small lads and big bulky lads. We've done a lot with rugby teams, and the deadlift can be an awkward one to set up. Do you know what I mean? And because rugby players tend to carry a little bit more weight just because of the nature of their sport, and the lower back just tends to be a little bit weaker or a little bit more at risk. So I just always found a trap bar deadlift a real good variation to set up for. And then similarly, if we look at something like a squat, like is a high bar squat the best variation we could do? We'll just say in normal runners. And again, I'd probably go down the route of, I'd probably either go with something like a front squat where we get probably a bit more range of motion, and it's probably a bit more applicable to hypertrophy. Or what I've gone doing an awful lot lately is like a cyclist squat where we elevate the heels, and again we're probably getting a little bit more hypertrophy and a lot more range of motion. And if we want to go down that route of going like putting more load on the bar, then I'd probably just go with like a box squat.
What's a cyclist squat, Darragh?
A cyclist squat is just where you like just like a slant board or a ramp. It's just like a heel elevated squat, essentially, but it will be very deep. Like the hamstrings will be covering the calves, and it will be like quite a deep squat. Really good for again developing quads.
And where are you loading that, on the front or the back, or is it kind of a dumbbell?
You normally load like a back squat, so you just get that extra touch of range of motion. Yeah, it can be quite good, as we were kind of chatting about earlier on. It can alleviate any ankle kind of mobility issues. But from a hypertrophy point of view, they're really good. They're really, really good.
Because like Damien and Shane, you both, like Damien, you said before that you tend to give, because you're working largely with rugby players, the option between trap bar or normal deadlift. And what are your thoughts then on squatting? Do you give them a bit of choice, or is it largely a back squat?
It it kind of depends on the player. Like because of their very different sizes, shapes, ranges of motion and stuff. I've gone down the line of talking to lads about front squats, and that's helped with maybe some of my taller players. They found that a little bit more comfortable to get down in. But then I've had smaller players then kind of maybe prefer the back squat a little bit more, that they struggle to find a comfortable position for the bar to sit. So it very much depends on the player themselves and what their, I suppose, training experience is. So maybe if I have someone younger who's relatively new to it all, you might be able to coach them in a little bit more. But if you have somebody who's 25, 26, 27 and they have a degree of training experience behind them, and they have these kind of stop points or issues, then just trying to coach around those to get the best bang for your buck, especially in season. Obviously the off season is its own kettle of fish, where you can maybe put a bit more focus into maybe fixing a few things or working on a few things. But I do like to give lads the option on the program to work within their own capabilities, really.
And when you were with, say, Leinster underage a bit, you'd have very much focused on the box squat. It's kind of become the Leinster way, and you're now the box squatter players, is it?
That's what they were doing at the time. Yeah, it was all box squatting. Now I think they might have had a conversation about trying to move past that, but that was what we, all of our CPD days, everything was just focusing on coaching that box squat at that time.
And with Apex, Shane, when you're doing this, particularly the S&C sorts with coaches, do you have a particular model, or do you kind of teach them all and let the coach make the best decision around it?
We teach them all just because I think it's valuable for everybody to know them all. Because if you build your structure solely around a box squat, and then someone comes to you with any issue that they can't do a box squat, you have to at the very least have a plan B. Like, you can't have, it's like, all right, well, sorry, you're dropped because you can't box squat. Like, I don't care how good at rugby you are, you don't fit into my program, so you're gone. As much as I'd like to have that power, I don't, not yet anyway. But yeah, so we will coach them all, and then we will lean towards still a box squat and a hex bar deadlift. Just again, that's what we build our programs around, but there's always that leeway and flexibility, because no two players are the same, so you have to have a very much a systems approach as a coach, where you build different movements of different players into your system, rather than having set methods, and then if they don't fit, they have to try and work around your methods rather than the other way around.
Because in terms of some of the pros and cons, like, you have to, I suppose, remember what your ultimate goal is, and if it's to get the players stronger, well, what's the easiest way to do this with the least kind of effort in one way on my part, but also to kind of knock on negative effects on their sport. And you'd probably speak to this, Darragh, that if I want to get a player's leg stronger, and I can use a back squat at 120 kg or a front squat at 90 kg, well, the front squat is probably going to do the same work with slightly less weight and have far less overall fatigue on the player going out to play rugby tomorrow night, GA in 2 nights, whatever like that.
Yeah, it's a risk to reward ratio. It comes back to that, like, and just to touch on what the lads were saying, like, some brilliant points, like, and I think the first thing when you do go looking at different programs and putting in movements and so on, like, is we want to create some sort of stimulus, and after that we just identify, is it going to be, this is the way I've always done it, is like a power stimulus, a strength, or hypertrophy. And that's the way I've been very kind of DUP with the way I look at things of late. So if I want to move things really quick, is that like am I going to do like a barbell jump squat? Okay, and then if I want to move a good amount of weight without causing too much, like a pump type effect, then something like a box squat to me makes a lot of sense. But then from a hypertrophy, would I really use box squats? Probably not. It's probably, I'm going to have to do an awful lot of work to get the same amount of mechanical damage. I would probably go with something like even a front squat, or even a split squat, or a heel elevated squat, something where we're getting that extra range of motion. So yeah, I always bring it back to question one: what's the stimulus we're looking for, and what's the best way about? Because I've all three of you, I've been studying people in that train strength and coach strength, and you could get people really strong using full range of motion squats. You can get people really strong using quarter squats. You can get people really strong using front squats, high bars. Cal Dietz is famous for his split squat. There's millions of different ways of doing this. I think it's as us as coaches, it comes back to like what aligns with the way you want to coach this. But at the end of the day, you do have to create some sort of response within the body. But there's definitely there's 1,000 ways of skinning a cat. But find the way that aligns with what you believe and what suits the group in front of you. But at the end of the day, you do have to create that stimulus.
I suppose there's a difference as well between being a very strong person and having, say, a very strong squat or something like that. If you solely focus on one element, obviously of course you're going to get stronger in that position. But if you want, say if you're working with athletes, you need a more well-rounded athlete who's strong in every aspect of their body, or kind of have a more overall body approach. Whereas if you just want someone, if you have an individual client who just wants a strong squat, you can focus more on that strong squat.
Yeah, like the knock-on effect of someone going pretty heavy in the gym, like how is that going to affect the field session, which is actually far more important. Do you know what I mean? A friend of mine, Adrian, he often says sometimes players can have a bad performance in the pitch and they try and out-train it in the gym, but that can have a knock-on effect to their next pitch session, which is probably more important. And I can totally get that. I've been in that position where I would have performed badly on a Saturday, went to the gym on a Monday and trained really hard, and then you're tanked for training on Tuesday again. So it kind of defeated the whole purpose of it, because the gym is meant to assist the pitch stuff, not the other way around. But that's what happens, I suppose. And again, it comes down to educating players on the neural fatigue from when you go quite heavy in some of the gym movements, like particularly like the squats and your deadlifts and so on. That's probably one of the areas I do be quite cautious of, is getting close to like an 8 or a 9 RPE when it comes to some of them gym lifts. I try and avoid it. Like very, very rarely will I go near it, just because of that knock-on fatigue that comes from it. I don't think as field sport players, like we need to be going there that often. Maybe if you're testing like a 3RM or something, but I haven't found much benefit going too close to it too often anyway.
I feel there's still a bit of that from, I suppose it's an old school coaching thing that's carried through, because kind of similar to what Damien was saying. Whereas if the lads do go out and play terrible on a Sunday, they'd be like, right, it's Monday, you're going to pay for that running session, or like run them till they puke, have them in the gym for 3 hours. And that's still, again, like you said, you're compounding the problem, and then they have 1 day's less recovery. They're more than likely still going to be crap now when it gets to next Saturday, rather than having an extra day's rest and getting to the root of the problem. So that's still, unfortunately, still something we're dealing with. But again, it just highlights the importance of recovery.
You made some good points there that we want to touch on a bit more around, like what RPEs we're hitting and even what is that. But before we get into those, we'll just touch on upper body a bit. Again, is a bench press completely necessary for the benefit of field sports? And if not, are there alternatives? Like, I'm going to guess, particularly the three, because you've worked with rugby and you played a good bit as well, Darragh, you're probably much better technique-wise coming through a school system, so that when you are benching later in life, there's probably more protection in and around your shoulders in the way you do it. Whereas I see so many, particularly because, like in hurling especially, there tends to be a lot of cranky shoulders, and barbell benching tends to aggravate that a bit more. What are some ways we can maybe kind of mitigate that, or some variations we can use to still get a good heavy upper body press without making that shoulder area a bit angrier than it needs to be?
Yeah, I guess I've always complemented like a horizontal press with a vertical press, not to be like doing 2 days of like a bench press, a barbell bench press. Definitely have some sort of vertical press if possible. And as most people would probably agree with, like dumbbells do work pretty well for most people. The only issue you might get is if what I found is the actual weight of dumbbells aren't accessible in local kind of GA gyms. They might go to 10 or 15 kilos, which mightn't be enough to load properly. Like the bench press does get a lot of slack, but like at the end of the day, it's probably the easiest method of putting on the most amount of load. Like again, we can get that more stimulus from that bench press. Like bring the grip a little bit wider. It's going to be a bit more like strength focused. Bring it a little bit narrower, and we're going to get that hypertrophy. I think it does tick a lot of boxes. Lads enjoy it, which I think is important for players that they do. Do you know what I mean? But lads do enjoy benching. It's the first question everyone asks. So why deprive them of it? Like, do you know what I mean? For the sake of going with like I would just say a vertical press, like a military press, like, you know, like what's the harm in having the bench press really in there? But what I would say is lots of external rotation work I found to complement the bench press. Like that stuff is really boring, and you only really know about it until you get like a rotator cuff injury. But like planting that in, whether it be at the end of the session or in between the bench sets, just making sure we're getting it in. And there's tons of different exercises we can do for that.
What are some examples, just really briefly?
I like that seated external rotation. So where like you're sitting on a bench.
The porn star one.
Yeah.
Porn stars, man.
I love that one. I do I wear one of those Borat mankinis when I do it. No, yeah, I love that one, and I like the Cuban rotations too. I think just really easy set up and gets it up into, and obviously not the banded external ones coming out from the rig and coming from the floor. So yeah, they're really good. There's tons of them, but I think just any variation of external rotation I find just keeping a really rigid kind of like 90-90 position at the elbow just tends to be the way to do it. I know myself when I'm doing it and I'm starting to get tired or I'm not concentrating properly. Like that is the first kind of technique glitch that pops up, as that angle starts to increase or decrease or drops, or so yeah, that kind of 90-90 position does work quite well at your elbow and your shoulder.
When you do have the bench press in your program, I feel it makes it more easy to control that variable, because as you said, like the lads love it, and if you have a group of players between 16 and 25, whether you put it in the program or not, they're going to bench press with a bar at some stage. So at least when you have it in your plan, you can program it again. You can partner it with those accessory lifts and those filler exercises to make sure they're doing it properly, and that they're getting it's balanced out and they're getting their rotation work in as well. So I think it's good to have in. And again, obviously if the person is able to, and then you can see them, and if they are struggling, their technique is wrong, you can fix it, rather than just, if you banish it or put a ban on it, it'll probably just push them to do it even more and just not tell you about it. So then they're probably more than likely doing it wrong in their own time.
And like, are you looking at a few different variations there, even Shane, when you're like programming it to lads, just to ease some of the pressure on the shoulder? You maybe going, standard bench press for maybe 3 sets on Monday, and then Wednesday session maybe pull it in for a close grip, because players might start thinking then, oh, close grip, I like the way I'm so good at bench now, he's actually giving me a different type of it here.
Not necessarily. I guess I've always kind of went with like a bench or a horizontal variation in one day and a vertical on the other day. And for GA, that's kind of, I found that to be 2 days is tends to be plenty. If I was to go with another day, I'd probably just like you said, John, either go with a different variation, whether it be grip or just the angles, so like an incline or a decline bench. That bit of variety can be all you need really. Like, just to change it up, like.
And would you ever look at floor press? It's something I thought for a while, oh, this is brilliant, it's just so much safer on the shoulders, but it's a pain in the hole to set up.
Yeah, it can be a nuisance to set up. It can be handy though if someone wants to kind of overload those triceps and it has kind of narky shoulders or pecs. That's the one thing I found with the dumbbell bench. It's great for like leveling out imbalances and all that, but like the deeper it gets, the more it aggravates that shoulder. That's where the floor press can be handy, because it just really does load up the triceps.
That's dumbbell floor press more than barbell would you use, or would you jump between the two?
I guess you could go between the both. Yeah, I've definitely used both. I actually use it quite a lot in powerlifting. When I'm putting together programs, because I think it really overloads that top portion, which is again kind of the lockout phase. And again, if you want to bring it back to a more kind of context of something like rugby, it really does emphasize that like to simulate something like a handoff, for example. All right, it does really emphasize that locking out of the arm, which is again is probably as sport specific as you can make a gym movement. So it does have benefit there. Again, it comes back to like the barbell. We can load up a good bit more weight versus the dumbbells.
when I was trying to push the powerlifting a bit, I used to be not training with him, but I used to be in the gym at the same time as this Polish lad who was absolutely mad. We nicknamed him Crazy Polish Guy. But he used to, wherever my sticking point was at the bench, he used to keep going over and screaming at me, floor press, you need more floor press. So I assume it would have been beneficial for me then. To look then at actually developing a strength, Darragh, and say like a player now, because we are still in that extended off season, or even like looking ahead to the way it's potentially for GA, looking at like you'll probably have an off season from kind of maybe December to April in future years, and someone just says, I really want to get strong. So setting up across the week, how are we looking at in terms of be realistic to someone's time schedule and how many times they can go to the gym, but also I want to push strength, how many times can I hit it while still giving myself enough time to recover and get the proper benefits from it? Are we looking to focus on, kind of full body sessions, or do we break it up a couple of upper and lower throughout the week, or is it going to be very individual there?
Okay, so my approach to it, and look, it's forever changing, and like if you ask me this in 12 months time, I'll have a different way of doing things. That's the way I am, it's the way the coaching goes. But the way I would lay out a week is I think 3 days of strength sessions of like kind of three main days basically, and I do follow that DUP type setup. Okay, so there's something Olympic lifting, so to speak, or at least power, that's triple extension to some degree happening. It might just be, and in the start phase, that might just be like an RDL with a shrug on top. Like that's about as explosive or triple extension as it might go. But you have something power focused, something strength focused, something hypertrophy focused, and then I use this thing called dense strength, which we can get into in a sec as well. Okay, but early on in the year, like the first block of that, even though I'm using that DUP model, it's still very much hypertrophy focused. So that power block might look like, it might look like something like 5 triples, okay? And then as we progress into 3 phases, the middle phase might look like doubles, and the last phase, we'll say, coming out from the championship, we might be looking at singles. At that stage, we might have worked up to something like a kind of, we'll just say like a snatch pull or a pull from our hips. Whereas the strength movements, the rep range might be a little bit higher. It might be like a 5x6, okay, which is still in that classic strength range, that bracket, so 5 sets, 6 reps, kind of in around there. And then we move to that middle phase, it might come back to like a 3x5, and then again we're into that third phase, it might be a 2x4. So things are starting to get a little bit heavier. And the same kind of concept goes with the hypertrophy. Start off with something a little bit higher, 12s, 10s, and 8s. So we kind of keep the traits, but each block has a specific focus. So block 1 is more hypertrophy focused because everything seems to be on the higher end of the rep range. The middle is more strength focused, and the third is more power focused.
Are those blocks in around kind of 4 to 6 week blocks? Is that?
Yeah, I guess a 4 week with a deload after. And again, if you have something like a really long off season, and we just say, John, you come to me like, yeah, Darragh, like, I really need to work on the strength side of things. You might put like a double block of strength and just fiddle around the movements a small bit. Instead of front squat and you back squat, or vice versa, or you split squat, or whatever it is. But yeah, that's where I guess individualising it comes in a little bit more, that you can double up on those blocks, or maybe he doesn't need the hypertrophy. So like, again, you look at this, for example, of rugby. It makes a lot of sense that like a 28 or 29 year old player, like realistically, how much muscle mass is he going to put on? Maybe his time might be better spent doing a double block of the power type stuff. So yeah, that's how I lay out the weeks. It's usually 3 days, something like that, and I always have a 4th day where it's really just based around resilience. So whether that be like working more so on muscle groups like your tibialis, calf, VMO, that kind of stuff, where we kind of isolate muscle groups at really high rep ranges. Again, kind of branches into the hypertrophy, but the way I look at it, it's primarily for injury prevention, without infringing on trying to be a physio, which I have to be careful of. Just trying to different methods of, I suppose, creating resilience throughout the body.
And that dense strength you touched on there, what's that?
So dense strength is this idea I got off a coach named Keegan Smith. He created the Real Movement Project, and he would have worked with the Sydney Roosters, time they won the AFL. So it's just timed blocks. That's all it is, and I find it works really well for teams. So it's always 10-minute blocks. So for example, it could be a front squat, and it would be like a 10 by 3. So you start on the minute, so the load isn't too heavy. So you're getting it like a strength stimulus, and it's all timer blocks. So again, like, so we'll just say that first block, the hypertrophy focus block, like the dense strength movement there would have to be focused around hypertrophy. So it might be something like a close grip bench press, something that's going to stimulate a lot of that. Whereas you move into that middle block, now maybe just look at like a normal bench press, and the third block might be something like a floor press. Okay, so that's how I would kind of go with it. But I find they work really well. 10-minute blocks. They're not designed to gas you out for the first couple of sets. You really grease the groove, so you're getting good kind of quality practice of the movement. But coming to the last couple of sets, they do get a little bit more difficult. And the good thing about them is over the 4 weeks, there's kind of two ways of progressing them. You can progress either by increasing the load, so sticking by a 10 by 3 each week, or you can just increase the reps. So going 10 by 3 1 week, 10 by 4, 10 by 5, like you would with anything. But I think it's very tangible to see at the end of it, because it goes up in such big jumps. It goes from doing 30 reps 1 week to 40 reps to 50 to 60. It tends to work out. The numbers are a little bit easier on the eye at the end of the 4-week block. I found that to be a really good one for lads. They really tend to like, especially stuff like chin-ups and stuff, where someone maybe mightn't get too many reps, mightn't get like 4 sets of 6, but they might get 10 sets of 2. Do you know what I mean? So it's a decent amount of volume in it. That little bit of recovery tends to help them well.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Now, I like that concept. Just slightly to touch on there, you're not doing a huge amount of exercises, while you might actually push up the reps and the sets a bit there, and even talking about 5 sets of 6, but it's not this massive variation of, if you're handing someone a program, it's not a list of 12 exercises to get through here. You seem to be kind of, I don't mean minimalist there, but it's like you're getting the most and the least in terms of exercise selection.
Yeah, generally what I tend to do, it's that block, it's that approach, it's those four movements, 4 groupings, and it's 2 optional accessories. They're never usually compulsory. For a simple fact is, I think we can just get a lot done if those first 4 movements are picked properly. Then we can get the most of it done through that. I'll give an example of a block I sent out to a guy today. Like his power block was hang power snatch. It was 5 doubles. His strength block was a 4x5. It was front squat. Hypertrophy block then, that probably would have been a bench press or something similar, like a 3x10 or a 4x8, and then the dense strength was along the lines of chin-ups. So then the optional accessories is usually just rotational core stuff and maybe some external rotation stuff. So I try and blood that in the optional accessory stuff. But if he's too tanked at the end of it, then you kind of, it's not the end of the world if he doesn't do it.
And you slightly throughout the course of the week rotating that. So the hypertrophy there in that session is the upper body push, and his strength work is squat based. Later on in the week, is he doing more strength based stuff in the bench and more hypertrophy stuff in the squat, is it?
Yeah. So over the course of a hinge, so I want to get a lower body hinge and a squat in the strength bracket every week, and probably the upper body push. Get them in and just mix them over the course of the week. The upper body pull might come in there at some stage, probably come into the, I said, I find it works really well for the dense strength stuff, whether it be pendlay rows, chin-ups, pull-ups. It tends to work really well in there, but they do get a little bit of that in, like, some of the power movements, as they progress on with it. With the more power focused stuff, I'm not as like hard and soft with that. Like, it's more of a case of, I see in 3 blocks down the road, I want the lads to be able to do like a hang power clean, and I just work my way back from that. Like, that's as complicated as I've ever went to it when it comes to working with GA or rugby players. A hang power clean or a hang power snatch, that's as hard as it's ever got. That's phase 3. Phase 2 and 1 are really simple before that. It's just like a shrug, stuff like that, but it starts to build up. We kind of build our way into it, basically. So yeah, and look, I suppose I try to interspread as much bilateral work as I can. Like, it might fall into the resilience stuff, it might fall into the optional accessory stuff. I try and keep that kind of more fun stuff in the optional stuff. I find if the more important stuff is in there, if they have like, it can sometimes get lost. I try and keep it to the optional, because if they have a good session, you get the bulk of the good stuff done, then there should be plenty at the end of it then.
Something I'm playing around with slightly now is doing some of that accessory stuff as my warm-up. Just real light, but for reasonably high reps, core stuff, single leg or Bulgarian squats, but with no weight, and just kind of getting the blood flowing, getting that pump, and addressing some imbalances for maybe 2 to 3 rounds of some kind of circuit there. I find that a great way to, in some way, address an imbalance, but I'm still ready to go straight into my more power or strength-based stuff after that. When it comes to in-season then, and players, rugby, soccer, GA, whatever, are back on the pitch, how much do we need to do to try and maintain that strength? And even how can we build it in? Like, ideally, would we try and build it in kind of in before or after some of the pitch sessions? Can it all be done in one gym session on its own? Or does it just take a lot of kind of thought-out management based on their scenario on that?
Yeah, I guess you always just have to be mindful of not affecting or not taking too much from the field sessions. And I guess I've always erred on the side of caution there. Like, if in doubt, go be conservative. And sometimes you have to kind of check yourself. You might have a lovely plan made out for the month of April, but they've got, after 2 hard games, look, you have to change it around a small bit. But in the ideal scenario, if they play a game on a Saturday, just say they're playing a game on a Saturday, I want to get my gym session in after that, as close to that as possible, because it's what matters. It's what matters the least. So, like, if it's rugby, they might be really sore. It might be 48 hours before they can do it. And then what you might be actually be able to do is, like, 48 hours before the match, you might be able to get in like an upper body focus type session as well. Which, like, at the end of the day, I'll just make sure it doesn't conflict too much with the sport itself. But definitely one strength session during the year with one kind of minor one. So whether that's upper body, or if you can get a little bit more. If you're not too beat up, like GA could be able to get like a second session in, because they don't tend to have that as much, like that physical DOMs that you would get from playing rugby, like with the contact and stuff. So like if they can get 2 sessions in, like 2 30-minute sessions, like you should be able to get a lot done in 30 minutes, especially in the summer where you're not going to be as cold. You probably don't need to be warming up for as long. If you can add in, like you said, John, that's really good stuff to be adding in, like split squats and RDLs, that kind of stuff in your warm up. Like, you're getting that added resilience work. It's okay. You mightn't be increasing your strength, your power massively, but you're going to maintain an awful lot of it if you can just microdose that stuff throughout the year, as opposed to going in and getting a 90-minute or 2-hour big session in. We'll just say the day before you do a hard hurling session. Like, the risk of pulling a hamstring or straining a calf is so much higher then. I think you just microdose it throughout the week. I think it's a better approach anyway.
I suppose, I know you mentioned, Darragh, that you didn't want to tread on any physio's toes there, but say from an injury prevention perspective, from the S&C role, obviously if somebody's in the up in front of the physio, it's it's probably a bit late, but how do you kind of go about programming in, say, injury prevention movements into your programs, or do you kind of leave that stuff to the field-based kind of sessions, or do you still have gym floor injury prevention, say hurdle hops, even like calf raises, stuff like that, for your Achilles, different things like that?
Yeah, no, I do. I put in stuff now. Like, it depends. Like, some people, the injury prevention stuff is a strength stimulus to them. So, but I would include. So I have 2 kind of trails of thoughts that I go. There's 2 kind of people I've been following, and I really like what they do. And the 2 of them, from what I can see, are nearly 2 opposites. But I tend to just pick what works, what I like from both. So a lot of what I've been doing, because I work a lot with camogie teams lately, is doing a lot of like rib cage kind of movements. So where we're really working the obliques and keeping this rib cage down. What you tend to happen is this really elevated rib cage, and this all this stuff I'm kind of getting from a man called David Gray. Really good. You should check his Instagram out. He does an awful lot of stuff on the rib cage, on like, and really simple movements like body weight movements that really get the hamstrings firing. But it's all about keeping this. Well, from what I can gather, it's about proper breathing mechanics, but keeping this lovely stacked rib cage. Okay, and it's about it kind of avoiding getting into this really extension heavy kind of position, right? So David's stuff is brilliant. Really nice guy. Would be a great guy to have on at some stage. Really intelligent fella. But his work around that. But then on the flip side of it, there's this guy named Ben Patrick, American guy, works a lot with NBA players. He was actually on Mark Bell's podcast there the week just gone. His name is the Knees Over Toes guy. And he really pushes the knee way out over the toe. So like we're talking like 8 inches over his big toe, his knee is. Like he's that much ankle range of motion. And the rationale behind it is this extra range of motion really and strengthening the VMO. It's all about strengthening the VMO. That's something I brought into working with female camogie players because they're just that bit more susceptible to the cruciate injuries and stuff. So yeah, those two concepts, getting a neutral rib cage, really working the deeper core muscles with that, getting the inner hamstring to do a lot of work, and then complementing it with Ben's work, where we're really working the VMO. So when you see a lot of Ben stuff, like even the way he does Nordics, is he will come down at a relatively slow speed and he'll hit the floor and he'll whip back up. So he gets into this a lot of extension, all right, which is the exact opposite of what I see a lot of David stuff doing. But I can see merit to both sides of it. So to me, it's about picking it out. Like what's really common for me to do right now is I have one day where they focus on really slow eccentric Nordics, like 8-second eccentrics, and I have another one where they work like these half Nordics, so where they got this bench set up, we'll say just in front of them. So I kind of come down, we'll just say, like I come down with just 20 degrees, this bench is there, I lightly touch and I push back up off it, so I'm getting that concentric kind of push off the bench as well. All right, I'm not quite at the point where my chest is touching the ground yet, but you should look him up. It's really impressive. But those two ideas of getting the VMO and getting the quads to be as strong as possible, but vice versa, getting the hamstrings to take a lot of the work, get this rib cage into a neutral position, so we're not fighting any kind of fighting going on between either side of it. And make sure that the spinal erectors aren't doing too much work. The hamstrings are working as much as they can. I found that's what I've been doing a lot of lately. It's kind of what I've been learning about. It's just kind of something I do anyway. I try and take a little bit from everyone as I go along. I don't try not to get pigeonholed into one trail of coaching. I try and take from as many guys as I can and use their best bits. I'm a user.
Did I see he had a video up on Mark Bell's YouTube during the week that he does a lot of backwards sled pulling, just because he said all of the movement we do is forwards, so to try and balance some of that out we do some weighted backwards work.
Yeah, he calls it reversing out knee pain. I don't know, has anyone ever done reverse leg drags? They are really tough on the quads, and if you really focus on pushing through the ball of your foot, it just tends to kind of correlate a bit more with the quads, and if you do them, like, he does them pretty quick. But yeah, I put them in my warm ups every day. I do them lower body. I always do reverse sled drags, and then I actually do I push them forward. But yeah, he does a lot of reverse. Does a lot of reverse work. He has this kind of cool machine. It's like you can add resistance to it, so I don't need any weight on it. It's like a flywheel type machine. And yes, you can like turn up the resistance, so as he's pushing back, and then as he progresses week to week, he's cranking up the resistance on it. I think Rogue sell him. Looks really cool now. But yeah, his sleds are one of his go-tos for everyone. And the great thing about him is that, like, they can be used for everyone. Like in one of the videos, he has his mum, and like she's doing assisted sled drags, like, but no weight on the sled. So the sled is whatever, 10-15 kilos. He's kind of giving her a little push with it. But in the other image, it's got a dude, looks like he's coaching for the NFL, and he's got like whatever 150 kilos on the sled. His quads are huge. Like the quad pump you get off when you really let the knee come out over the toe, it's nothing in comparison to just standard squatting. And it's kind of really opened my eyes into this. The quad doesn't really get used until it's well out over that toe and we're in a deep range of motion.
Something you mentioned earlier, Darragh, around when it comes to squats and getting heavy and stuff like that, you don't want players getting up to a 9 or a 10 RPE. Like, we'd have chatted about RPE before. Shane was saying he uses quite a bit at the end of a session, but I know in a lot of your coaching you use it on a particular set, and each set is to a particular RPE. I know it would have come from Mike Tusher's work. Could you just give us a bit of an explanation around that?
Yeah, so an RPE is just a rate of perceived exertion. There's different scales. I use the 1 to 10, but essentially 10 being, so in a powerlifting concept, it would be your absolute 1 rep max. Something like a 9 would be you couldn't do another rep, but you might be able to do, say, a small bit more weight. So you did like 140 kilos of a squat, you might have got 142. It's that kind of a way. Whereas a 10 would be there was no way in hell you could have got anything more than 140. So it's different grades. I think it's really useful for more experienced lifters as they go along. It kind of keeps the reins back on them a small bit. But similarly, I've tried using it with beginners, and there's a couple of issues with it I found. Number one, they don't really know what an RPE 10 feels like. So they might say, yeah, that was difficult, but it moved quite well. The bar speed was quite fast. So no, it didn't, like that wasn't the 10, and it just takes a bit of learning. So that's the one issue I would say. I think it's probably more suited to that intermediate to advanced in regards to our powerlifting setup anyway. But with regards like scaling training or not having them, again, that fatigue kind of control, like keeping fatigue as low as possible, I think it's a brilliant method.
And how do you program that in? Like, what kind of a typical session or maybe a couple of sessions look like based around RPE?
So what there's kind of two ways you could do it. You could do something along the lines of, like, say, set a single at an 8 RPE and let the person pick their load. So say, for example, Damien's training a couple of years, he knows a single at an 8 is 100 kilos. Okay? Or you can use, 200, my bad. Or you can use, there is a chart that correlates the RPE to the percentage of the 1RM. I'm sure you've seen it. And that's what I use. That's what I use most of the time. Because if you're coaching someone, I find that the amount of thinking they want to do in the gym, they want it to be minimal. They just want to go in. Most people want to go in and just follow what's on. So what I will do is give them a set number, and that number usually correlates to that chart. So say, for example, I can't think off the top of my head what it is, but a single might be, say, 85% or 90%. And then you can allow for 2 or 3% either side of it, depending on how they're feeling on the day. So Damien goes in, he's 8 RPE. You could say take a single at an 8 RPE, or you could say take a single at 100 kilos, and go with it that way.
And some of the benefits of that would be like that you don't have to max out and lift your heaviest weight every single week. You can get to, getting to 8 in most sessions will probably lead to strength improving over time. But it also lets them regulate based on like general fatigue, from other stuff in life. That like when it comes to mid-season and you're after playing a couple of games to have you wrecked, your potential 1RM of a squat might be down 10, 15, maybe 20 kg. So if you work up to an 8 RP based on the day, while it's way less, it's going to be the overall same stimulus as maybe 20 kg heavier 2 months previously, but it's the best you can do to keep strength up without like wrecking you for next hurling, football, rugby, soccer session or however it might be that way.
Yeah, and that's spot on. Like, and as you said, it's about creating that stimulus. The stimulus in June could be very different to the stimulus in November. And look, there is a lot of merit to doing that lower intensity work as well. There's guys there, data-driven strength. They do a lot of research around that, like lower 5 to 6 RPE type stuff, and how that's like there's good research to show like that can build an awful lot of strength. We don't need to be pressing as hard as we think. And look, I suppose it does come back to the person a small bit too. Some people like to feel that they're training hard. Do you know what I mean? And they like to be challenged a bit. Other people who are probably a little bit more in tune with their body, they might like to press as hard. They're probably a little bit more sensitive, or they higher stress jobs. They have more variations of stress coming in. Maybe giving them a bit more control over their training is the best thing you can do for them. So they can allow it to kind of go up and down. Something I've actually kind of been popping in lately is so give them that kind of that ballpark figure, say that 100 kilos, but give them the option of a 5 kilo either side. So if they're feeling really good, they can kick on to 105, and if they're not feeling so good, it's 95. You know, like, so they're still going to get that good training stimulus, but if they're feeling cooked, they can dial it back a bit.
And I suppose there with that, say, because you're involved in obviously rugby and GA in several different capacities there, how do you find, I suppose, the different athletes in that regard when you take, say, rugby, the maybe the training knowledge or experience of that, you know, programming on the gym floor? I know, like you mentioned there about, you know, sometimes you give them that, you know, some athletes that room to push on because they like to be pushed. Do you see much of a difference between, say, rugby and, say, GA? From my experience, I would kind of see that that pushing from the GA, that like lads think they need to be pushed the whole time, whereas I found in my experience rugby, they kind of get that programming a little bit, and they get that follow the program and will improve. Have you seen much in that line of a difference between them, or do you find that the GA is kind of catching up a little bit over the past number of years on an athlete perspective, that they're actually getting that follow the program a little bit better?
Yeah, I think the rugby is still light years ahead of the GAA when it comes to S&C, and it's particularly the players, like the players' understanding. I would imagine that schools rugby has a lot to answer for that, and getting organised strength conditioning programs in at a very young age. So like Munster development teams, not just in schools, where there be club setups as well. It's 15, 16, this stuff has started to be implemented. And I guess on top of that, so number one, you're getting kind of structured S&C coaching from a very young age. Like, for example, when I was in Rockwood in fifth year, we all got like S&C programs through a Munster branch S&C coach. Do you know what I mean? So it was all like, it's all bodyweight type stuff, but from there it had started. Whereas GA, like, that doesn't happen, or it's catching up now, but it definitely wasn't happening 10 years ago when I got that. And the other side to it is, I think rugby players know that in order for them to be successful in the sport, they have to have a decent amount of muscle mass. Okay, and the only way to get that is through being in a gym scenario, in some form of strength training. Whereas a GA player, like, only now are the real athletic guys, the kings. But like, go back 10 years ago, like Gooch Cooper wasn't like Kieran Kilkenny is now. They were different physiques of players. Whereas now the Gerard Hegartys of the world, your Jim Burns, they're big, strong, athletic men. Lee Ching, these kind of guys, like, in 10 years' time now, it's 14, 15, 16. I think GA players, they would be chomping at the bit to get in, because they know that's what's required. But yeah, the rugby guys, probably just their meathead attitude. They tend to love being in the gym, but they are very aware of certain days to kick it on, and I think it's just more exposure to it.
Speaking of being in the gym, when it comes to training with you, they don't necessarily just get a program and go off to their own gym. You have your own gym. You moved. If there's anyone from America listening, you went from essentially California to Florida, going from Limerick across to Tramore there in Waterford. How long have you been open? And we'll largely talk pre-COVID times now, but how long have you been open? What kind of way do you run? What's kind of your USP?
I've never heard anyone compare Limerick to California before. I thought you were going to say Detroit or something. So yeah, we opened up the gym in August 2019. So me and Gina, it's a strength and conditioning facility. we were both working in gyms, me in Limerick and Gina in Waterford, and we decided we'd come together and put our dream together, and we opened up a strength conditioning facility. So what we do is, from a business perspective, is probably not ideal in that we cater to a lot of different people. They say in business you should have a niche market and you should go after that hard. Whereas we cater for everything from everyday people, total beginners to exercise, right up to lads playing sport, to powerlifters. We cater to a wide variety of people. So, for example, pre-COVID, we had an over 65s groups in with us. We had people getting ready for their first powerlifting competition. We had lads getting ready for a county final, all in the same day. And to be honest, I love that. I love the variety of it. I hate being pigeonholed into one type of person to work with. So we run classes where the majority of, I suppose, like everyday people are in. A lot of our GA players will be in that as well. So I have a way I kind of set them up. We have our semi-private, which is more towards our beginners or anyone that wants to focus more on fat loss. And then we have our powerlifting group, which is self-explanatory. They work more towards the powerlifting. With our semi-private stuff, they all get an individual program. So again, if someone was carrying a bit of a knock or a niggle, that would be a good place for them to start. And then our strength conditioning, our classes, so to speak, they don't really run as classes, they're more sessions. So they come in, we follow a warm-up where we'll do some like mobility, sometimes loaded, a lot of activation work, and then we have a block of maybe they might do 2 big lifts, so a front squat and maybe like an inverted row or something. Half the group works that. The other half of the group will work core and accessory stuff. So it's given people a bit of what they want, so which is that the core type work, the accessory work, but also give them some of the bigger lifts, which I know they get a lot more bang for their buck with. And then we come together and we finish up with like a 10 or 15 minute kind of AMRAP type conditioning session. So people leave with a bit of a kind of a sweat on. I just find that general people just like to get that sweat going. They, as we said earlier on, they associate it with hard training and getting a lot of work done. My opinion on that can be, it's spread out, but it's good to give them a bit of that because they kind of leave knowing that they enjoyed it. But hopefully, anyway.
And that variety of members you have, to be fair, it probably suits the location and area you're in, and that there is a huge variety of clientele. So like it makes sense to bring in a lot of people as opposed to, okay, we're just going to focus on training GA teams, because you'd get in some, but there's a whole other area of the population there. You're like, oh, this is money that can be made. This is people that can be trained. These are lives that can be improved. Why wouldn't we open up to that, really? Yeah,
and like our main ethos was to help people get healthier, happier, and stronger. And when you stand back from that, so many people fall into that bracket. And what I always say to people is, if you can fall into to 2 of those 3, you're more than welcome in our place. Okay, so if you fall into, I'd like to be healthier and a little bit stronger, perfect, come on in. Do you know what I mean? So as long as you fit into that, you're going to fit into our place, and it covers an awful lot of people. Whereas if you came in and you just wanted to, I want 8 weeks, I want to trim all the fat down and just want to go to crash diet, it's not really that healthy. You're not going to be happy. You're definitely not going to get stronger. We're probably not the place for you. So like there is a certain type of person that fits for us, but it just so happens it's fairly wide reaching, more so than narrow niche market.
Yeah, real nice gym, in fairness. I've done a few sessions there, really impressed. And I love, like, you can have a class going on one part, but you can have an individual working out in another corner, and you're not, like, it's spacious enough and it's kind of sectioned enough to not be bothered by one by the other. And like, you'd have some decent crowds in, like you'd have some Waterford underage camogie teams in, like you're well able to cater for numbers and stuff too.
Yeah, it's ideal from like that big group environment, that it's big enough that you can spread out, but you don't get lost either. Do you know what I mean? There's plenty of space, and even since you've been down, John, we've actually segregated a kind of section of it where we have like the powerlifting kind of area. So we've 3 competition racks and deadlifts. So like just that they can come in, and I think what kind of happened once or twice is the lads were kind of powerlifting training, and they might have been blending in with some of the people just, maybe doing the class that are semi-private, and sometimes that might come across as intimidating with, say, a woman, her very first day or training, and a man might be deadlifting, we'll just say 200 kilos, and it looks like a awful lot of plates in the bar, and it slams. He's not doing anything wrong. He's doing exactly what he should be doing. But it's two different people, people on two different journeys. So we said, look, it just for the sake of making sure no one felt out of place or didn't feel put out, that we made this kind of section where the lads lifting the heavy timber go in there, and then we have our group section outside, and it works really well. There's a bit of flow to the place, so hopefully we get to crank it back open and get it going again soon.
And you've been developing your own powerlifting team there. That's gaining a few numbers. You're lifting some big weights there. Hoping now when competitions get going, you'd be ready to dominate.
Yeah, they're going brilliant. Like we probably have 10, 12, I'd say, and like we initially like I was very strong in it when I initially came down, and obviously Gina, like we thought like we had played with the idea of going solely after powerlifting. There was no other gym in Waterford doing it. Like there's gyms in Dublin and Limerick and Cork. That's all they do. They focus on powerlifting. So we had played with that idea. But look, the way I looked at it was I prefer to be grabbing with the way our ethos was, it would grab a bit more. But in the new year, I would hopefully get the lads on the platform. I have 2 or 3 I coach in Limerick online as well. So between getting them on the platform, we have a couple of lads like your Elaine and a couple more who are absolutely flying it. Like they're progressing at such a good rate, and it's just be great to get them on to the platform, because all the training in the world, it's like anything. You want to get up and compete, and you want to feel that nerve-wrackingness. Do you know what I mean? We did a little in-house competition, and they got a taste for that, and they loved it. Like it was brilliant, a really good day out. Like we had lads, loading on. It was really we did it as professionally as we could, and it was a great experience. So that's what we want to give them. We're trying to give them as many of those good experiences as we can, and the next stage for most of them is to get onto a proper stage and see what they're made of.
Because Gina as well, she's competed for Ireland a few times too, like alongside you, or you've both worn the Irish singlet.
Yeah, Gina went to the Western Euros as well, and she went to the European Championships just after that. So she's extremely strong. She's closing on the 100 kilo bench for a female is very impressive, considering she's about 60 kilos or so. So very, very impressive. Really big squatting, about 150 kilo squat and a 170 kilo deadlift. The deadlift is her nemesis. It hasn't moved in a bit, but she's a fantastic squat. She's really good levers for a squat. So yeah, she's a good model, especially for all the females that join the powerlifting, because it is 50-50. And that's the thing about it. People tend to think that it's masculine or this or that. It's not. It's anything from it. The days of the West Side Barbell are well and truly gone. If you go to a powerlifting competition, it is 50-50, men and women of all shapes and sizes. There's weight classes from 50 kilos to 120 or 40 or 50 kilos plus. Do you know what I mean? So that's the beauty of it. So Gina does a really good example for females getting into the sport. Definitely.
So when do you manage to get in your own training, actually? Sorry, in everything we're talking about here, I know you mentioned very early on here today that you were carrying a few niggles and stuff. How are you managing, I suppose, with all the coaching you're doing, plus everything going on at the moment? How are you kind of managing all that?
Yeah, my own training took a big hit when I came down, to be honest. And look, I was actually thinking before I came on, like I hurt my adductor on the left side. It's going on about 18 months. It's kind of transitioned to the right side, which is actually really common in adductor tendonitis apparently. But like between opening the gym, getting the injury, at the same, I had just came back from Worlds, so I had hit my goal. I don't know, subconsciously was the drive not as much there, but yeah, my training sessions, they tend to be a lot shorter and sharper now. When normal things are open, I don't have 2.5, 3 hours to give the training like maybe I used to be able to. And look, it has definitely hindered it to some extent. But look, that's the joys of it. You can't win every battle. But yeah, I'm enjoying at the moment. As I said, I'm kind of trialing something a little bit different, trying to rehab this adductor as best I can. Hopefully go back playing a bit of sport this year as well. So it definitely plays a role. And a couple of different gym owners did say it to me. It's like when you open up your own place, it's going to have a big effect on your own training. And I just thought, nah, I won't. I'll be fine, you know. But yeah, Dave did added a little bit of extra stress. It obviously just slowed down the recovery process a little bit. And I wasn't agreeing to the whole pile. But yeah, lesson learned definitely.
And is it largely time management, or is it stress, or just the combination of the two?
No, it's time management. Like it's not that my training sessions will be overly difficult or anything like that. Like it's just trying to find time to do them properly. Like, do you know what I mean? Definitely on a Monday, Wednesday, Friday, I do not get time. Just with the way the session laid out and stuff, you like, you know, bar you skip a meal or something like that. Like, but.
And then that has massive like recovery implications if you're skipping a meal to train.
Yeah, like, or you train really late at night, like, and then all of a sudden you don't sleep properly and you're tired at work the following morning. You know what I mean? So usually I train Tuesday, Thursday, and probably a Saturday, Sunday. That kind of works the best for me. Tuesday, Thursday kind of quiet. Saturday, Sunday, a bit of time on the weekends. Definitely Sunday is my longer day anyway. But right now I'm loving it. Right now I'm training 6 days a week. I'm training as much as I can, and the only benefit to being in lockdown and having access to a gym is you can do this. So I may as well make as much use of it as I can. But yeah, when it comes back to our normality, it does kind of reduce to about 4 good sessions. That's actually where the dense strength I find is really, really, really useful. And I find the sled work, it just gets you warm really quick. You're just ready to go. There's a good, like, you'd be surprised the amount of mobility that actually goes on there doing those sled drags and sled pushes. So between that and then a lot of dense strength stuff, it's just making as much out of the time I have. But yeah, and on the grand scheme of things, I still have plenty of time to train. I'm not as I think at times though it is nice to just get out of the gym. Do you know what I mean? I've often went for just like a walk on the beach, or, you know, and that can be just as good, just to get a different environment. Because if you're in there for 10 hours a day, you might want to go back in there again and train on top of it.
Really briefly before we wrap up, we kind of just want to chat a little bit about weightlifting shoes. So those of us who are big into just lifting weights, we would actually have, you know, similar thoughts and kind of connections with our weightlifting shoes as a lot of players who have field sports have with their football boots, knowing the brands, the fancy ones, what's in fashion. Damien, before we started recording, you I suppose gave out some very strong thoughts, and there's one best weightlifting shoe. What is it?
The Addy Powers. They're phenomenal. I'm completely sold on them. And just a little bit of history. So I had a kind of limited edition, all blacked out ones, and they got robbed. And the heartbreak of that actually took me somewhere in the region of about 18 months, maybe almost 2 years before I was in a position to buy another pair. It was proper devastation. So, but I've gone back to the same boot, the same shoe, and I couldn't be happier.
To give that a little bit of context, these would be pretty much the predators of the weightlifting shoe world. Shane, you really appreciate yours, but you wouldn't be as much of a connoisseur of the weightlifting shoes.
No, to be honest, I genuinely just can't afford another shoe addiction. So anyone who knows me knows I'm a bit of a shoe nut, but I mean, Jordan started releasing golf shoes last year. I have 3 pairs. Of the last year, I've been able to play golf, 2 months of the 12? So I honestly can't afford it. So I have normal shoes, I got a pair of Air Jordan football boots, and again, haven't used them. Don't actually play football anymore. 3 pairs of golf shoes, and I just can't. I have a pair of the Addy Power Lifts. They're essentially, do you remember when you had Predator Manias? The real ones had like the stripes that went all the way down to the base, and then there was a fat knockoff pair that was the next step back that was essentially the exact same without the 3 lines went down to the base, and it saves you like £100, and that'll do me for the moment. But no, I just can't.
You're losing about 10% of your lifts, Shane.
I know, but I'm keeping about 10% of my shoe funds for my next golf shoe excursion.
The same way the Predators used to give you that extra little bit of curl on the ball when you kicked it, you're losing those extra 5 or 10 kg in your squat. To like open up the Adidas Nike debate. For some reason, I do prefer Adidas for pretty much everything, but I have the Nike Remelio 2s, which like I bought them second hand. They're fairly old school. They'd be like the Total 90 Nike boots from around the 04 European Championships, and they're probably from then as well. They're that old. You know, I'm like Manish there on the wing for Portugal playing the European Championships. Darragh, what do you wear?
I have a pair of Addy Zeros. I think Gina got me for my birthday. They're not the blacked out ones, but I can feel Damien. I had the Addy Powers for a long time, and they're the old school, they're proper predators. But yeah, I was laughing. I was telling the lads earlier on that the buddy of mine, he insisted on getting the highest heels possible, and the Reebok ones, and I tried them on. They're literally like stilettos. You feel like your center of balance, center of mass is just coming way forward with them on. There's like, it's a huge heel. I must look up what they are, but I think it's close on 4 mil.
If we were to liken some others then to actual football boots, the real classics are the Adidas ones. They're kind of the precursor to Addy Power with the timber heel. They're kind of like your classic World Cups that all the Germans would have worn around that 1990 World Cup.
Kaisers.
Yeah, like the Kaisers. And ones that I'm really impressed by, I think Omar Isuf has a pair of their blue suede shoes, and they look so cool. They're like something that Piros Demos wore in like the 96 Olympics or something like that.
I can see people just listening to this now and just checking out about 5 minutes ago.
The people who get this, they really get exactly what we're on about here.
Lifetime members, the followers.
There's some other lifter, and I can't remember who it is, but they have one pair of bright pink weightlifting shoes and one pair of bright yellow, and they always wear like one of each. So bright yellow and bright pink one day, and then swap them over the next. Can you remember who it is, Darragh?
That's LS McLean, I'd say. Yeah, he there's another brand too which are pretty decent. Do you know is it DS8? Am I getting that right? It's a bright green type. Can't think of it. I could have the name wrong on it. I thought it was DS8, but they remind me of, you remember Roy Keane's? He had the green kappas.
Oh yes.
Yeah, they remind me of those. I get the name. I'll text it on to you. But that's every time I see him, I think Roy Keane.
That's the job.
It's been nice to nerd out there for the last few minutes. Darragh, absolutely brilliant having you on. Where can we find you on social media there, both the gym and yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Darragh_RTB on Instagram, and the gym is Raise the Bar Training Systems. Yeah, Instagram is the best place to get us.
Lovely. Thanks a million for your time, Darragh.
Thanks for having me on, lads. I appreciate it.